Hello and welcome to the Leadership Exchange. Today I'm joined by Dr. Tamaklo, who is the second generation chief executive of the family-run business in Ghana, who actually are celebrating their 50th anniversary this year. Congratulations and welcome, Elikem.
Thank you for having me.
A great pleasure, a great pleasure. I'm delighted that you're available to have a chat this afternoon about your experiences this year. And there you are, right in the front line. As a doctor previously yourself, before becoming a chief exec, you know the depths of the challenges as a medical professional, as well as a chief exec. So it's going to be great to hear of your experiences informed by both perspectives today. So looking back on this year, I just want to start right off with the fact that you had COVID this year, not just you, but your family. And you made a decision to be open about that. And I know from our previous conversations that that was met with some different and conflicting responses as to whether that was a good thing to do, a wise thing to do. And so I'm curious, as the leader of your organization, looking back, would you choose to do the same again? And if so, why? And if not, why?
It's a great question to start with, because when I look back at the experience, it always blows my mind when I think about how quickly we had to make decisions. The speed of, first of all, having the symptoms, then having the test, and from getting the confirmation of the results, having to engage with the shareholders, the board of directors, my executive team. All of that happened within a space of 24 hours, whilst having to also be there for my family, because it affected my wife. Both of us had the same symptoms, or had symptoms of fever and body aches, and my wife lost her sense of smell. But also our children were completely fine, but were positive. So I went through a significant amount of decision stress, if you like to call that. But I was supported by a group of people. And I think that was where the clarity on our values helped in making that decision. Our values is all about trust. Our mission, our vision is to be Africa's most trusted name in healthcare. And what we're very focused on is building a culture of trust. And so really part of authenticity. And as the leader, it was important for me to model that. So it really helped in making that decision. And looking back, I think there was no other decision that we could have taken if we wanted to stick to that culture of trust. I think that was where, at that time, many people in Ghana were not talking about COVID. There was a lot of stigma. There was a lot of fear around what would happen. And leading a private hospital, I also was aware that we were very much at the front lines, because we were the first private hospital to not only test for COVID, but also treat. And so we had to be very careful in our messaging, and I'm very thankful when I look back. But the focus on values was the key decision maker, or helped in making that, the principle of making that decision.
Thank you for explaining that. That's lovely to hear about, your values and how that really informed your decision as a leader. We all need to bring those values to life in our behaviors every day. And it was that call to trust that meant that you showed up in this regard. That's fantastic.
It wasn't easy. There were many people who felt that doing a video so publicly was the wrong approach. What happened was that I did a video in my office and posted it on my social media pages, as well as having informed all our clients and all our key stakeholders by letter. But the video was important because it was my story, it was my family's story, and I felt I had to control the narrative. But there were lots of critics about the approach. And as I look back, actually, it did start a conversation. a public conversation, which was really around why was there so much stigma around this. When you look in other countries, like the UK, you don't necessarily see the same behaviors. It shows up differently. But in Ghana, it was one that we had to address because people were afraid. I think that's what leadership sometimes calls you to do, is to do the things that perhaps you believe in, where you might go by intuition. So as you made a decision by the values, but there is a bit of the approach that is very subjective, and there are many ways of doing the same thing. I think that's probably where intuition and the gut and being true to myself was also important, but it was difficult.
Mm. Well, I applaud you for that decision. And I'm sure it was inspirational to many, and set the tone in terms of what you stand for in a way that was profound, actually.
It was surprising. I didn't expect it to have so much reach. I thought it would be a few people watching it. That's it over and done. But it just picked up and was shared on WhatsApp and shared around. Also on the national news. So what was interesting was how it gave people a voice, because then other people started to declare their status and tackle stigma. So I wouldn't have foreseen that. I don't think that was my intention, but in hindsight, you can see that was a great benefit to do.
Mm. A real role in leading society, and yeah, leadership is much greater than just leading your organization in and of itself, but actually what's the impact on society. So as well as realizing that, and that's so important around the values, bringing that to life in a whole different way, unexpected way, difficult way for you and your family, what else have you realized during this year in leading the organization? What's it really brought to life for you as a leader?
I look back and I realize now that there are different phases of the pandemic. The emergency phase, which was, chaotic, um, you know, very, very stressful. And I realized that I needed to be very much in the leadership role, very visible, in order to give people a focal point and to help control all the noise. There was so much miscommunication and disinformation, that my role became even more important in terms of my communication. And something I didn't realize was that it was okay. I had to give myself permission to lead, in a directive manner. Normally, I probably would have said, I'm I love to be very facilitative. I love to engage. I love for us to try and find a common ground. But this was where, in a conversation with you, actually, I remember that it was tapping into my role when I was an emergency physician. And in that context, when there's chaos, it was very easy for me to become the focal point and allow other people to do their jobs. Actually, there was nothing wrong with me being very directive, because it allowed people to not second guess each other. And I think that's something I took from that experience to bring into that emergency phase. But that's not something that's sustainable. You can't be in that role forever. And that was also another awareness. As the pandemic continued on, I think I had to give myself permission to rest, and permission to take care of myself. That for me was actually, unfortunately, I learned that lesson when I had a panic attack. And I share that openly because, again, it's another thing that people don't talk about. But, where the mental strain, and how I managed myself was really the fatigue and that relentless need to be on the forefront. That permission to give myself the ability to rest was one that also ask for help was one that I take with me, um, in all situations. So I think that I've learned a lot. I've taken things from the past and brought it to every phase, and we're going into a new phase, which is now requiring me to step back and let other people come to the fore, which is very interesting because now it's about the team, and it's about, I mean, it's always been about the team, but it's now about the other faces really becoming more vocal. So that's not just my voice. And I think that is where it's fascinating to see those voices coming from the ground, people, the gardeners or the security men, or, I mean, these people who maybe in the beginning had to just focus and put your head down and really drive. But empowering these other voices has been very insightful. We're planning for next year. We're planning our budgets. And I sat in the meetings yesterday, and I was very proud because what I saw was a lot of people very engaged, very clear about what they wanted to drive and planning for that. So I think that's a great take home.
That's wonderful. Leadership happens at all levels in organizations, doesn't it? It's not just preserved for the top table. So wonderful to hear how everybody's stepping forward now. And do you, after the need to deal with the crisis, the emergency room, as it were, do you now feel a sense of optimism for the future or something different? What's your feeling?
I definitely, I'm an optimist by nature. I love to really stoke hope because it's so easy to get disenfranchised. It's so easy to kind of get demoralized. So by nature, I do focus on being hopeful. I think what this pandemic did teach us, it accelerated a number of conversations which we always felt were too big, were probably 2-year timelines, but then we had to have the conversations in 2 months. And I think that validation that actually, you know what, we can do this quicker, faster, and still drive change. An example is implementing the PCR lab within 2 months, where there was a global supply chain shortage. You know, how we were able to work together and with external partners was something that we actually showed ourselves that it was possible. So I think maybe that's something that I'm very optimistic. It does take a lot of communication, and that's really where everyone's agency. My son is crying currently. I'm not sure if you can hear that, but it does require everyone to step up, and that's why I was very happy to see it was one of our customer experience personnel who drove that sense of we can do it. We were implementing a virtual clinic, and people were very frustrated, and he brought his voice and said, we can do it. We did the first client on a virtual clinic and led people celebrating. And I was really, really encouraged by that. So I'm very optimistic. I think that it's shown us what we can do if we come together.
How are you going to preserve that sense of urgency though in your organization? Because there's no doubt in terms of I completely agree with you. It illuminated, accelerated all sorts of things that we all in our lives and our businesses had sort of put on the too difficult pile or the important but not urgent pile. And then suddenly there was this great need to do things very fast, and we just sort of cut through all sorts of stuff to make decisions, make stuff happen, pull together. The urgency created that momentum and required us to address things that may not, probably definitely wouldn't have got addressed in the time. How are we going to maintain that? Because there was so much good that came from that. How do we not just sort of go back into, business as usual or complacency or, sidelining those important things that aren't urgent or that feel too tricky, too complex? Have you got any thoughts on that, Elikem?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely a great theme that needs to be considered, because when I look at where we came from, execution was a challenge. Execution, which was really about having to move quickly. That for me was where I was probably the leader who's trying to run and trying to move and trying to get everyone to follow me. But the benefit of having an accelerated growth curve. We had started working with our executive team, our extended leadership team. And what happened was the burning platform for change. We're here to save lives, and that became really real. and still is. I mean, there is a reminder for everyone about what is important. I think that's something, I heard a very great phrase, which is don't let a good crisis go to waste, in the sense of what it can do for reawakening people's original intent and people's deep-seated mission and their personal values. So I think that's what's happened this year. And I think that now is about how do we intentionally take our people through that journey, not just becoming awake. And I actually gave the phrase, which is like sleeping giants who have now been stirred up, which I love. I mean, I'd read it from a book somewhere, but there was that sense that, all the people in the organization are amazing, but it requires them to be very intentional and present. So the question now is about how do we intentionally create that culture of trust that I'm referring to, which is now not about a leader who's at the front end leading, but one of partnership where everyone is empowered. And I'm very aware that that is probably still a lot of work required to put great programming in place. And we have an amazing team. Our HR team have been amazing. And we have a culture and change manager who's blossomed. I say that because he started weekly ignites with all teams during this COVID pandemic, and the weekly ignites reaffirmed why we've come here. So I'm excited for the future, and I believe that we need to continue that momentum. And sustaining that momentum for change is one we talk about, but we need people to come alongside us as well. I don't want to negate that. It's not about us doing it on our own. When I look at the COVID pandemic, the partnership, and I mean everything that we've done, I need to commend so many people, because every success that we had in terms of making it through, I can always point to people who stepped in and helped. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. But it's an encouragement to really be focused and know and ride on this wave. It has cost us a lot, and that's really where we need to make sure we leverage the momentum.
You mentioned costs there, Elikem. What has been lost through this time?
I think of the reason why we exist. It is really sad that people have lost their lives. My family, we went through COVID without anyone being affected. But just recently, one of my wife's aunts, just died, and when you look at the true cost and numbers of people's lives, that really is the heart of it's such a big loss. So that is definitely at the top of the list. But the second thing, which I think it's cost us, is cost us some amount of time with relationships that we probably have negated. And so, like when I say relationships, I'm really referring to times when the time that's been lost is a cost. And I think that I really now am reminded that I need to really prioritize my relationships and really building that, because when you are in a lockdown, I know the UK is in a lockdown and you can't interact, you can't engage. That is a significant cost. So, I mean, for us here, I think we're watching to see the numbers are going up. We're watching to see if there's going to be some sort of restriction, but it really makes us cherish the ability to interact with people. And I think that's it's a big thing.
Thank you. I'm going to put this question, of course, to you as a doctor. So I'm treading carefully in my analogy here. But if the virus were the antidote to cure in our world or in business, what's your perspective in terms of its positive intent, accepting and totally acknowledging the losses that you have very clearly spoken of? Yeah, what's the virus looking to cause in our world and for us?
That's a very interesting analogy because you don't often see the virus as an antidote. You see it as an enemy.
Mm,
And that's where, if I just look at the word antidote and look at what's it trying to cause, um, I think everyone has realized that life is important. life is, life is, we move so quickly in life. We speed through, and it's always, I mean, what I think this has taught a lot of people is actually to be more mindful, to be more present, be very thankful for the things that we often forget, or we actually don't prioritize. And I think that when I was going through my experience of having COVID, I remember like it was a mental battle because it was about the questions going through my mind were, have I prioritized the right things? Did I spend enough time with my wife and my kids?
mm,
Was it all about work? And if something was to happen, have I not lived a life worth living? Which is an interesting thing because I think for everyone, I think everyone is just we're living life now. So I think everyone's waiting, eager for this to go behind us so they can now live the lives that they wanted to. And I won't be surprised if people do things for the first time, maybe something that it's cured. I wouldn't, it's time will tell as well because lots of challenges in the world. So the question about will we revert back to what we were, revert back to old ways of old patterns is very much a real um, risk. And I think it would be for us to keep that intentionality.
mm. Yeah, talking with other leaders, yeah, like yourself, and friends and family, it has created yeah, a real invitation to make some new choices, to take stock, um, and that's not easy.
Yeah.
But this has been a real provocation to say, okay, what really matters to me in this next stage of my life, and it rests with us to take responsibility to then, as you say, change the habits if that's what we want to do. And that's down to everybody individually to play their part and to make the choices for themselves. Yeah. So, Elikem, you've been in this role now for over 5 years as chief exec. How has the experience of leading through this year forever changed your leadership? Talking of new habits, yeah, how does this shape your leadership for the future?
Um, that's a great, good questions. I remember like thinking as you've been going through these times, it's such an amazing opportunity when you ask answering questions like these. It always forces you to reflect and really think. And the 5 year journey for me was not easy. And a lot of it was second guessing, um, feeling questions around my approach, my decisions. And every year it has been about faith in that vision because it's an enormous vision to be Africa's most trusted name. It's kind of audacious. And when we talk about big, hairy, audacious goals, very much that's one. Because trust is not based on equipment or the latest technology. Trust is not based on a one-time thing. It's a consistent way of being, which is extremely challenging and difficult, but worth it. So over the 5 years, I've always questioned, have I done enough? Have my decisions been um, the right decisions? With COVID coming, one of the things, hands down, that I had a bit of um, peace and validation around was that it is always worth it when you stick with your values. It's always worth it when you keep that faith alive for whatever you've come to do, and not be disheartened because there's so many things that threaten and try to. I mean, everyone. I'm sure you, like every human being, always has the ups and downs. So leadership is extremely challenging. So when people choose to lead, the beauty of actually knowing that over time, you can see the impact of that is for me, the biggest lesson for me for this year. Because when I had COVID, going back to when I had COVID, the fact that we had a strong board who were present, the fact that I had an executive team who had different skills to bring to the table and were able to kind of help and craft a communication strategy. The fact that we had shareholders who are my family, and family governance is a whole different conversation. But the whole family dynamic of managing that, and then corporate governance, which is separate. And actually, the work that we've done over the last 5 years all came to the front when I had my diagnosis. And it just so happened, it happened at the same time we were going for the accreditation for our PCR lab. So there was a lot riding on that time. So I'm really thankful that I have the benefit of seeing the impact of the last 5 years. And probably as I go into the future, it's to continue challenging myself to not lose hope, and to continue challenging myself to keep being extremely empathetic to those around me and to the situation, to be able to adapt to the situation as and when it changes, and to see the flags that signal change. I think that for me is a fantastic opportunity for the future.
Wonderful. Elikem, thank you so much for joining me today in this conversation. It's been an inspiration to hear how this time has accelerated trust, both within Nyaho and also in your relationship with Ghana, with your nation, and more broadly. So wonderful to hear how it's taken you further on your journey that started over 50 years ago. And I really wish you well for the future. And I look forward to seeing you personally again, hopefully in the not too distant future when we're able to meet again. But for now, thank you so much for this conversation this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.